giving you distortion, but it's giving you what's called soft clipping. If you looked at the waveform that it puts out, it's sort of a soft curve, and it flattens out the curve, but it's not that flat. If you start using distortion, it flattens out that curve to more what they call square wave, and it gets, you know, much more radical. So here's the Boss classic DS1 distortion. And you can hear it's not just a matter of more distortion, it's a different quality of distortion. Also, when I back off my volume, it doesn't clean up. Well, a little bit, but not like an overdrive. Yeah, there isn't a whole lot more to say about it. I mean, it's if you want that big hard rock sound, they have various ways to get it with these kind of pedals. There's you know, they have Marshall emulating pedals that will give it to you, which is more of an amp type sound, but more than a standard overdrive. The thing is, if you really play heavy metal and you check out all the heavy metal players, there are no heavy metal players that use a heavy metal pedal. You know, what they're getting their sound from an amp with a lot of gain, like a rectifier played really loud. And at most, they'll be using an overdrive or something to kick that lower boost, to kick that last bit of stuff in for the solos. Heavy metal pedals are, if you're a session guy or you play live and for one song somebody wants a heavy metal sound, but they want it at a volume, you know, that they can play in a singer-songwriter club, which, you know, I've been there, done that, and they're great for that, you know, and distortions are great for that, which brings me to sort of the placement of the volume pedal. I'll get into that now before I get to the fuzz stuff. I always put my volume pedal after my overdrives or distortions. And that way I can get that sound at any volume I want. I'm using a clean amp, I'm not using the amp for distortion, so the sound of the amp is not going to change with the sound, with how much volume is being put into it. It's set for clean. But if I want to get... I can get that sound at any volume I want. And I can get a sound my grandmother would be happy with. You know, and I mean, but this is how I started. I mean, my first professional gig was with a Sheraton Hotel show band, touring around playing Sheraton hotels. They wanted to hear Smoke on the Water, but they didn't want to disturb the diners. You know, thank God for the MXR distortion pedal. That's all I can say. You know, that's how you do it. Any questions on distortion pedals? Okay. Oh, that's interesting. Have the compressor on. I guess this one cleans up pretty good. But some of them won't. Moving along to fuzz. Now fuzz is something I've only gotten into recently, I guess along with everyone else. For a long time, nobody, you know, between the 60s and the late 90s, fuzz sort of fell out of favor. It was all about either amp distortion, bluesy overdrives, you know, maybe distortion pedals, but nobody played fuzz tones anymore. Starting around the mid-late 90s, they started showing up, you know, with people like the White Stripes and later the Black Keys and, you know, I think, what's his face, Billy Corrigan, you know, guys like that. They started using fuzz pedals, and fuzz pedal covers a lot of territory, and that's part of the fun of it, but there's tons of different ones. And if you really want a complete tutorial on the difference in germanium fuzzes, just either go to my site, Guitar Moderne, where I've linked to it and posted a video of Joe Gore. I don't know if anybody's familiar with him, but he wrote for Guitar Player for years, and he played with PJ Harvey, and he actually got every germanium fuzz kit available and built every style of germanium fuzz that existed between the 66 and 68 or something like that. And you can hear the difference in the sound of them. The one my personal favorite is the fuzz face sound, because once again, it's the dynamics and the expressiveness of it. That's for me, I'm not here. This earthquake or dream crusher is basically a fuzz face circuit. And what fuzz face does, it's not the most fuzz that any fuzz does, but it's got that sound of the amp dying that I love. The coolest thing about it is you back your volume off, and it can completely clean up. And some fuzzes will clean up to where they sound almost indistinguishable from your clean sound. This is not one that does that, but this does something I like even more. It sort of, it brightens up the tone and sort of thins it out. And I spent years trying to figure out how to get some Jimi Hendrix rhythm tones. And you can play through any amp in the world with your Strat and never get them, because he was getting them by just basically turning his volume down with the fuzz face on. You can hear it. As soon as you hear it, you go, yes, you know. You can play through any Marshall in the world, it's not going to sound like that. But you play through the right kind of fuzz face and turn your volume down, and there's the sound. And then you turn up your... Now, to me, this particular fuzz face type thing sounds a little thin. And this is where stacking comes in again. If I was to either have my amp, a lot of times you'll hear guys use fuzz faces, but they're using it through an amp that's already a little broken up. Rather than turn this thing up again, I'll just turn on the blue note. All of a sudden it becomes fat as hell. Turn the volume down. And it still cleans up. That's the cool thing. And you really don't need much gain to fatten it out. You hear the difference? I mean, that's that real sort of grainy fuzz tone, which you might want sometimes. Or set it at just the right place, it gives you that dynamics that I was talking about. That's with the fuzz on. So for me, the fuzz face is the most expressive fuzz. Now the bad news. If it's actually made with germanium transistors, which gives you that really fat, warm tone. Germanium transistors are very susceptible to temperature. I just got the new Dunlop Mini fuzz face in for review, the germanium one, And I got home, I was super excited. It was sitting out on my porch, hot off the UPS truck, and I mean hot off the UPS truck. Took it inside, plugged it in, sounded terrible. And I'm thinking, wow, this is too bad. I must have gotten a broken one or a bad one. Half an hour later, cooled off in the air conditioning, sounded amazing. So if you're going to use germanium, that's one reason they stopped using germanium and switched to silicon and fuzzes, because they're just more, the silicon is more consistent. So you can use a germanium fuzz. Just make sure you get it acclimated to the club or studio temperature before you start playing, because otherwise anything can happen. And I understand cold is the same thing, but I assume you want to get it, let it warm up and stuff. But it's, for me, it's actually would be worth it, because to me it's my favorite fuzz sound. It really, it's Eric Johnson, it's Michael Landau, I think, is the guy who really got me into that sound. He was using it. So that's germanium. Any question on germanium fuzzes? And once again, you want it the first thing, if possible, in your chain, because all this stuff I'm talking about, the way it responds to this, and the way and the dynamics, and it also can get really, from what I'm saying, when you put a boosted pedal in front of it, anything with a buffer in it, it changes the way it interacts with your guitar volume and your guitar, and it can start sounding shrill, and you're just not going to get the same tone. You might, I mean, I've heard it, somebody demoed it once, and it didn't sound horrible, but if I had my preferences, this is the sound I would want. So that's one kind of fuzz. The other kind of main kind of fuzz, and there's a million variations on this. They have the WTF pedal here, the J-Rocket WTF, which is built, basically designed by Paul Trombetta, and I have one of his fuzzes at home, and it sounds great. And it reacts and does stuff sort of like this, but not exactly the same. It has its own charms and I guess it's based on the mini bone, and you'll get these crazy, cool trombone type sounds, and it's very cool. So that's another one variation of this, and there are dozens of others. There's the Satisfaction fuzz. There's I mean, if you go to my site and check out this video, he does 12 different germanium fuzzes. They all sound completely different. But well, I shouldn't say that, because some of them were actually fuzz face circuits under other names, so they sound similar to the fuzz face. So you'll just have to decide if that's the sound you want. The other big fuzz sound is more or less based on the Big Muff, the Electro-Harmonix Big Muff. And that's a totally different thing. I thought this Monarch was based on it, but it's closer. But the Big Muff itself, it's just that Robert Fripp sound, that super sustainy, super fuzz thing. Yeah, it's just that big bottom. But I'm running this at like full gain, and that's the most gain. That's the most sustain it's given me. So I think it's a great sounding pedal, but it's not as close to the Big Muff as I would have liked to demo. If any of you ever heard a Big Muff, I mean, it's more, Actually, if I keep the compressor on, that's to me more what a real Big Muff sounds. It's much more compressed than this Monarch, and which, I mean, it's not a good or bad thing. The Monarch sounds great, and if you want a less compressed version of the Big Muff, it's a great pedal. And then just stick a compressor in front of it. For the Jack White, Black Keys type thing. Just see that. This isn't going to clean up the same way. Got the compressor off. But this still cleans up some, but not quite like a... So that's close. I mean, I think people are probably familiar with the Big Muff and have heard it, what it sounds like. But this is more out of that school, I would say, than out of the fuzz face. But it also gives you an idea of what kind of wide-ranging tones you can get out of fuzz tones. And I just find I have a lot of character, and